Welcome to Keith Knight, Don't Tread on Anyone. Today I have Chase Hughes joining me. He's a behavioral expert. He spent 20 years in the U.S. military and now teaches intelligence agencies as well as the general public in persuasion, interrogation, and behavior profiling. You probably know him from the excellent behavior panel. Check him out at chasehughes.com. He was also named one of the top CEOs of 2020 by CEO Weekly, and he has a new book, 6-Minute X-Ray. Mr. Hughes, where is the best place to buy the book?
I would say Amazon is probably the best and cheapest.
Very nice. Well, thank you so much for coming on. You start a lot of your classes with a quote by Sun Tzu, where he says, "Build your opponent a golden bridge to retreat across." What is the significance of this quote?
I think that is the core of my entire approach to interrogation. And I teach interrogation for a living. And I did 20 years in the military, and it's hard to imagine. I've never been rude, and I've never conducted a rude interview or interrogation. And I think that kind of speaks for itself. But the quote, I think, goes back, if you've seen the TV show Columbo, it harkens back to that. I grew up with that. That's what got me interested in psychology to begin with. And if you haven't seen Columbo and you're interested in psychology and persuasion, that is the master class of what that means. But I think that quote means that I'm building them a very perfect out. So you can confess to a crime and it makes you feel noble, or it makes you feel good to do that. And while retaining some degree of integrity on your own without ruining your reputation. But you're making the best case scenario. The most glorious thing they could possibly do or experience is to comply or to confess to an interrogation. I think the same is true in persuasion or influence. And I think interrogation and parenting and sales and psychotherapy are all the same. They're all in the same business. It's just human persuasion and influence.
Why do people sometimes falsely confess to committing crimes?
There's a few factors to it. Let's go through the factors. So number one, you have a prolonged period of isolation. These are contributed by a researcher. The last name is Ofsche, Ofsche. So a prolonged period of time. Number two, repetitive use of phrases. And if I was to describe mind control and brainwashing in one word, it would be repetition. And so there's repetition. There is a suggested and believed doubt in one's own cognitive abilities or memory recall. So someone is made to question their own memory through whatever means. And there's some definite methods to doing that kind of stuff, but they're made to question their own memory. And fourth, there is some kind of mental impairment. And this isn't one of the factors that makes it happen, but this is a contributor to many of the cases that the person had some kind of maybe a social disorder or social disruption going on. The internal factors that need to be present are suggestibility. So a person's high on the suggestibility scale. And keep in mind, suggestibility is a fluid thing. We are suggestible based on the environment we're in and the people that we're around. And most importantly, our tribe. We grew up, we're evolved creatures, and we evolved into these beings that are very, very focused around what the other part of the tribe is doing. And 500,000 years ago, if you did not worry about what your tribe was doing, you'd probably get kicked out, which means you don't have sex, which means your DNA stops existing on the earth. So that's kind of a big deal. And finally, there's a factor that psychologists refer to as fantasy proneness. And someone who is particularly prone to fantasy to a certain degree. So they're prone to accept ideas that might not sound logical. And it seems like, we're describing people that join cults or things like that. No, the most smart CEO that you've ever met is still capable of joining a cult. That's a whole different deal. So fantasy proneness are more likely to have false confessions happen. And they also fall under a category called iatrogenesis. They're more likely to have this from psychotherapists or mental health care providers. So they could take the dissociative disorder, dissociative identity disorder, which used to be called multiple personality disorder, can be actually implanted or given to a person by a healthcare provider. Most of the time, of course, unknowingly. They're not trying to do that. They didn't sign up to do that. But they have a test, or they go through, they ask questions a certain way and lead them down a path. It's the exact same thing that happens to where that person has dissociative identity disorder just because someone suggested it. So that's suggestibility and fantasy proneness.
Wow. What is mind control?
In my definition,
Yes.
the mind control is a system to capture and lead someone's imagination to change their beliefs in a way that they believe that they did it themselves.
Very interesting. Is this something that only exists sometimes with some people, or can you become a victim of this in your everyday life if you meet maybe manipulative people?
Yeah, so if we viewed mind control on a spectrum, so like this is the low grade mind control, and then we have like dudes strapped to a chair with his eyelids taped open watching videos like Clockwork Orange on that far end. On this side, where all of us are 100% exposed to mind control all the time. If we have public relations, propaganda, we see ads on Facebook that flash really quick and do the 3, 2, 1 countdown, and the music starts right away to keep you watching that video. That's mind control. It's capturing and leading the attention, which is the first two steps of mind control. Capture and lead. So social media, the news, all of that stuff is technically mind control. Commercials, advertising, all of that stuff is mind control. But I think we fall victim to the more dangerous aspects of mind control when we stop looking for competing beliefs to our own. That leads us to feel a sense of security. And if you think about a person who doesn't believe in like computer viruses, they're probably not going to download McAfee or some kind of antivirus software. So the more someone thinks that they're immune to something, the less they're going to either protect themselves or be on the lookout for something like that to happen to them.
What was MK Ultra?
MK Ultra was a very rushed, desperate attempt at a government trying to discover what was happening to our soldiers overseas. We had people that were being brainwashed in Korea and saying, I hate the United States, America is bad, and they're signing these statements, and it's scary. So it's one thing for women, back in that day, women to worry about husbands and sons and fathers coming home from the war a little bit upset or not coming home at all. It's a completely different worry in the American population to worry about dad coming home and having been programmed by the Koreans. And you don't know if he had programming or not. So that was a huge scare. That was just as bad or worse than the person not coming home at all. So there's this massive program. A bunch of dipshit morons were put in charge of funding this thing and coming up with all this stuff. And there was just funding going all over the place. It was not regulated. It was run by this guy named Bill Donovan, who was the director of what's now called the CIA. They called him Wild Bill Donovan. And this took place in the U.S. It took place in universities, in hospitals. It was with board-certified physicians, board-certified psychiatrists who had just tremendous, negligent, horrible violations of their Hippocratic oath and their code as healthcare providers. So it focused on manufacturing suggestibility and finding something called a truth serum, which they experimented with psilocybin and mushrooms and cocaine and LSD. And in the end, they wound up drugging people, and it just kind of the scope of the project became so broad that they were doing brain shocking on people. They were wiping memories. There's a hospital in Montreal called the Montauk Institute that had wiped people's entire lives from their heads. This a 39-year-old woman gets discharged after this treatment that she received. She has to wear a diaper. She can't remember her name. She has no more social skills. She's lost all of her memories. So they screwed up a whole lot of people, and I don't think they got much to show for it. On the good side of that, when we discovered how brainwashing works and how some of these mental tricks work, that's the reason nowadays that we have cognitive behavioral therapy and aversion therapy in psychology. If you look up aversion therapy and the process and how that works, that is a step-by-step guide to brainwashing. But we're using the same tool or the same weapon, so to speak, to help somebody instead of hurt them.
What was the most important contributions that you have researched from George Estabrooks?
I think George did most of, in my personal opinion, and I'm just saying this as me, I think I went to just so your viewers know, I went to the Colgate University Library. I talked to Dr. Estabrooks' family and got access to his journals and handwritten notes and stuff that survived the CIA document destruction order back in the day. So I was able to view, it was like 36 cubic feet of documents. That's how the library measures it. And I think the coolest thing that I got out of that, the coolest thing I saw, the most helpful, was his work with dissociation. So he specialized in hypnosis and what hypnosis and putting a person into a trance state, which we're all trance machines. Like the reason that you drove home a few weeks ago and you couldn't remember who was driving the car for the last 10 minutes, that's a trance. We all have that experience. So he capitalized on trance to do dissociation, to pull something apart, and created an alter ego. And keep in mind, this is very, very different from dissociative identity disorder. A disorder ruins your life. So you could have an alter ego in there. Imagine if I'm a hypnotherapist and I know the techniques on how to create an alter ego inside of you that stops you from eating junk food or gets your ass out of the bed in the morning and makes you go running and does all of the stuff that you would like to do. So, I mean, this can be helpful. There's even a book about this called The Alter Ego Effect that just came out about 1.5 years ago. But he experimented with Army officers mostly and would hypnotize them and put another personality in there. And I'm just saying that because it's a lack of a better term. That the other personality could only be brought out with using a code word. So he would bring out that other personality, give them all kinds of classified information and stuff like that. They memorized it. And then they would pop up the other guy, the normal person, send them across enemy lines, even if they were captured or tortured. That information wouldn't be coming out. And then, he'd like make it to the other side. And the person on the other side would say, I think it's going to be a moonless night tonight, or the moon's going to be clear and bright. I think that was the actual passcode. And that would unlock this other personality. And so he was a courier for classified information. And there's a document I have published on my website. It was called Super Spy, about the process of how that happens. He had a plan even that he wrote a letter, which I have. I can definitely share that with you if you want to put it in the description down here. But he had a plan that he sent to J. Edgar Hoover about capturing and hypnotizing a German submarine captain to go back to his own home port and torpedo all of the ships, which I thought was pretty fascinating and a little bit scary. But I think that was his best thing. He did a lot of research and work into the dissociative processes.
What is a Manchurian candidate?
By common definition, a Manchurian candidate is somebody who has theoretically unknowingly had another person or personality implanted in them to carry out an assassination, to perform some task or some action, kind of like we would imagine a sleeper in like watching Jason Bourne or something like that.
You were once asked if you could speak with anyone who was still living. You said you would like to speak with Sirhan Sirhan. Why would you choose him, and what would you ask him?
I think his case is very interesting. That there is a lot of evidence there that tells me just that there's some very interesting data points that I would love to look into. So Sirhan Sirhan is the guy who assassinated Robert Kennedy back in the day. He's a Palestinian national. And his claim is that he has no memory of the week prior. There's fuzzy memories around the entire event. He has no idea how he got to the building. A woman in a polka dot dress comes up to him before he conducts the shooting and pinches him on the side of the neck and whispers in his ear, and he can't remember what she said or who she was. And then the shooting takes place. Could be fantasy, but I want to look into it as a mind control researcher and as a behavioral researcher, because I think that's, if there is a case that's still accessible as far as the humans are concerned, that's the one to do it. That's the one that really rings all the bells, or most of the bells for me, to where I would want to go talk to him and speak with him and try to see if I could pull some of those memories out using some techniques that I personally use.
Wow. What was Project Artichoke?
I don't know much about Artichoke or Bluebird and all the other ones. They blur together in my head. So I know that there's a lot of overlap in between all of them. So there was MK Ultra, MK Search, which was run by the U.S. Navy. There's Artichoke and Bluebird. And I think Artichoke was the one that was run on the West Coast in and around San Francisco, if I'm not mistaken. And I think that had a sub-project called Project Midnight Climax, which is now on public record, but it was run by the CIA in a brothel. And they would have these prostitutes go and grab male Johns, bring them up there and drug them with LSD. And they would watch, of course, for science, according to the CIA, it's for science. They would watch everything that happened and watch what these guys would do and their behavioral reactions to receiving this LSD. And the CIA even admitted they were responsible for some, I think, 80% of the LSD that entered the country in the 60s. And I think it came down to one guy confusing milligrams with micrograms. And he ordered, I think, 10,000 times more than they wanted, which showed up somewhere in Texas. And they had a big delivery.
Well, you mentioned a document once titled Program Developed for Psychological Operations Command to Change and Crystallize Public Opinion. And there were 6 parts of this document. I'd like to go part by part and you explain what this means. Step number 1, create a small window of doubt or uncertainty.
This could be for any situation. So the small window of doubt or uncertainty makes us start to focus more. On an individual level, let's just say it's a one-on-one. Anything that's novel or new makes our brain start searching the environment for information. So any technique that's extremely effective is rooted in evolutionary psychology. So if you're learning persuasion or influence or therapy or anything having to do with people, and the techniques aren't rooted, their actual roots in evolutionary psychology, they're probably not going to be very effective. So if you go back 200,000 years, little tribes of humans living around each other, it's 150 people or so. If you went out and hunted every day and came back from the woods, take the same path every day, and you pass by one bush. There's this big ass bush. You walk past it every day. And one day you're walking past, dragging this big old deer behind you, and a stick snaps behind that bush. Your brain, when we do anything more than a few times, our brain says, okay, Keith is going to keep doing this behavior like driving a car. I'm going to hardwire this stuff together so that it's easier in the future. The more often you do it, the more it gets wired and wired and wired together. So there's a common saying that neurons that fire together wire together. But when something disrupts what we expect to happen, it creates doubt and uncertainty and focus. Most importantly, focus. When I'm teaching any intelligence op, I'm teaching civilians, my number one message throughout everything is focus is currency. Focus is currency. And if that stick snaps behind the bush, how much of your attention is on the deer behind you or on your kids or your family in the village? None. It's 100% on the new thing because we're following along a memorized timeline. Something disrupts it, and the brain says, something's different. I need to stop everything and flashlight laser focus on what's going on to figure out what's disrupting the script. So we are script machines, absolute script machines. So what we're doing there, the doubt and uncertainty manufactures focus.
Step number 2, develop doubt through targeted questions. What is an example of that?
So if you want to look at targeted questions that create doubt, just watch 5 or 6 political commercials. Do you really want Senator such and such to run your state? He donated $350,000 to some piece of crap drug cartel or whatever it is. So these are questions that make doubt. And we're going back to what the currency is here. What we focus on is based on the questions we ask ourselves. So from a self-help perspective, somebody that has low confidence, they're asking themselves, why can't I feel confident? So the questions have the brain go search for evidence that they should not feel confident. Why can't I feel more happy in the day? So the brain says, okay, I'll go search for reasons that you're not happy. So our focus is driven by questions. So what you're doing by asking questions is A, raising doubt, but B, you're rechanneling that same focus that you just created.
Step number 3, introduce questions that enhance confirmation bias. What does that mean?
Well, all of us are victims of confirmation bias. So we like to think, like if I made a post on social media, or you're scrolling through your social media right now, and you read a post that says, the media is brainwashing people. You're going to be like, oh yeah, I know they are. But in the back of our head, the scary, scary part is that you're going to think it's other people. That is the truly terrifying piece of that, is that when you see media brainwashes people, everyone agrees. Everyone agrees. But it's those other people. It's the people who watch the other political parties' news that I disagree with. Those are the big brainwashers. The media that I watch, they might do it a little bit, but they're not as bad. And they might do a little bit, but I'm not susceptible to that stuff. And that is where you are the most susceptible because you think you're not.
Step number 4, display information that confirms the bias on occasion. What's an example of that?
Yes. So they have a bias. We have a bias to think I made the right choice. I did the right thing. So you want to continuously feed that person what's basically their cognitive bias of being right, making the right decision, being part of the right group, being smarter than other people because you chose this. So you're going to continuously show them that they did the right thing. And basically all you're doing here is just a little syringe full of dopamine. And you're giving someone that confirmation bias is giving them the exact same amount that if you filled a syringe with dopamine and jabbed it in their neck. It's the exact same thing. The chemicals are still flooding their body.
Step number 5, reward the subject for having come to the conclusion or figured it out. What's an example of that?
So we're going to either, well, probably both. We're going to put somebody down who hasn't made the conclusion. We'll make them go, oh, yeah, I knew that way before. I figured that out a long time ago. But we're wanting them to know that they came to the conclusion on their own. And that's the truly scary part. If let's imagine like Keith, you and I went out tonight and let's say we went to your nearest airport and we interviewed 1,000 people. Do you believe that you can be easily brainwashed? Do you believe that you are currently being brainwashed? Do you buy products because of commercials? Everyone's going to say no. Everyone is going to say no. That is how thick that confirmation bias is. Because the moment that we have to say, I'm either independent or I'm brainwashed. So we cannot, that's called a cognitive dissonance. When the truth conflicts with our beliefs usually punch the truth in the face. And that's the ultimate thing. Were we done with the steps? Did we get through them? Okay.
No, one more. Oh, okay. So that was the end of that. Step number 6, expose the subject to a negative event in order to solidify the bias at the end. What does exposing them to a negative event have to do with solidifying the bias?
The negative event is usually associated with some kind of common threat. So if you and I live in Virginia Beach, but if you and I both lived here and there was a looming threat, we both bond together because we have a common enemy. So some kind of negative thing that happens solidifies what they chose to do. So let's say I chose to support X candidate, but Y candidate just had a bunch of nudes released on Twitter from their laptop. That giant negative event shows me that I'm not making the decision because of that negative event. I am so smart that I made it before that even happened. And I get more dopamine from that. And if you think about anything, you say you like bicycling, beekeeping, I like reading books, I like listening to music, I like drinking alcohol, whatever it is, it's not true. The only thing you actually like are serotonin and dopamine. There are nothing else. So in our brain, if you can see the brain back here, there's a little part of the brain right down in this area called the nucleus accumbens. And if you stick your fingers right above and forward of your ear and kind of point into your head, that's kind of right there. That's where it is. And its job, it's about the size of a pea or a peanut. Its entire job is to memorize things that gave you dopamine and try to manufacture those scenarios in the future. So it's going to be like, hey, Keith, dude, last time we did this, it was really badass. We felt really good last time we did this. You need to do it again. So that's how addiction forms with heroin, with sex, or with watching the news and choosing a political candidate. It's the same dopamine pathway.
There was once a question online that said, in one word, what could the world use more of? You responded, honor. What does it mean to have honor?
I think that it means that you do the right thing when the cameras are not rolling. So the people who talk about self-help, I'm going to go give somebody advice on how to live your life, wake up on time, be good to other people, and I'm like a piece of shit off camera. So I don't know if you cuss on your channel, I'm sorry. But I'm like a bad person off camera. That's bad. So I think live as close as you can to be a role model for people younger than you, and do it off camera when nobody's looking.
You were once interviewing a babysitter, asking her, what's the most severe punishment you ever gave? And she said something that you thought was so bad, it disqualified her. What was that punishment?
A, she wouldn't answer the question. B, she gave a vague answer that was, well, sometimes you need to take things into your own hands. And that's all she wanted to say about that. So I thanked her and said goodnight.
As far as getting kids' brains to develop properly at a young age, do you think things like spanking or constantly raising your voice help are neutral, do nothing? Do they harm? What's the deal with that?
I don't know much about child psychology at all. I would defer to every Dr. Phil episode I've ever watched. And when my kids were first born, I had no idea what I was doing. So I bought a book called Super Nanny, written by the lady from the TV show, and
Yeah,
it's the best book on parenting I've ever read.
really.
Yeah.
That's interesting. You were once on a plane. These are all things I've gotten from interviews. You said you were on a plane and a guy walked on the plane, and just by looking at him, you thought that he was about to hurt himself or harm others, and so you got up and brought this to the attention of the stewardess. What was it about this guy's body language or what he was looking like that made you that made the red flags go off?
This was just a few months ago, and he's actually wrote me a really nice thank you letter on Instagram. I guess he looked me up, but the dude was jacked, like 275, less body fat than me, and so he's a big dude. So I definitely didn't want to fight this guy, uh, and I thought it looked like aggression at first because they have something called a eye lock or target lock where the person's thinking and running through scenarios in their head. And it's usually at a downward angle off to the side. And even if they're moving around or walking, the eyes don't move. Second, the less the upper arm, this bone up here called the humerus bone, which is why we call that the funny bone. So the less the humerus travels when someone's moving, the more scared they are or worried about what they're about to do. So if there's one thing the human body does, if you go on YouTube, well, you're on YouTube right now. If you look around on YouTube and watch one of those scare compilations where people get the crap scared out of them, like a dude jumps out of a garbage can, you'll see the same thing happen in all humans. And this is why nonverbal communication is so vital. We've been doing it for millions of years. Language is new to us. But you'll see that people do the same thing. The first thing that happens when we make a fear facial expression is we go like this. So this downward movement here moves these muscles out right here. This is the myeloclastoid muscle, and it jumps in front of the carotid artery. It jumps in front. I even had a surgeon, a cancer surgeon, at one of my seminars one time who said that when they cut people's necks open to do thyroid surgeries and stuff, they have to really forcefully move that muscle out of the way to make sure the carotid's okay. So that's the first thing that happens when we make a fear facial expression. It protects the carotid artery. But muscles aren't enough, so we need some bones in the way. And then the shoulders come up. Then the person's arms, these humerus bones, squeeze into the torso. Then the wrists come up together. So that's fear. And everybody that we're born with those things, which is really cool. And so the less that upper part of the arm moves, the more that person is experiencing some kind of fear. And that's what I did. And we went to the I took him to the front of the plane. I used some de-escalation techniques that I teach the police and told him, hey, I'm a board certified hypnotherapist. Happy to help you out. And he was just having some really bad PTSD, anxiety kind of stuff going on. And we sat in the front of the plane and talked it out, did a little hypnosis.
Wow, interesting. What are some intellectual techniques that we can sort of embrace ourselves so we can avoid being manipulated by colleagues, bosses, politicians, advertisers, or even acquaintances?
If a person is going to be immune to influence, they would have to move to the middle of the desert and live off the grid. Never touch an electronic again for the rest of your life. I think influence is a good thing. The Food and Drug Administration has propaganda to make sure you eat the correct portions, to make sure you stay healthy and exercise and eat right and drink plenty of water. So some things are good. Some things we need to be influenced by. There's no vaccine. There's no inoculation to manipulation per se, because there's a gray line, you know? So the same tool I could use to make you join a cult, I could use the exact same technique to make you get rid of some childhood trauma and change your entire life. So the best way to understand when it's happening, the best way to really realize that it's happening is to know what the techniques are.
I'm sorry, I'm going to skip that. There is generally some ancient wisdom in the Jonathan Haidt book that I've been reading, where he talks about how those who are easily brought to anger or fear are easily manipulated. Why is it that we're more able to be manipulated when we're afraid or we're angry? I mean, how come we're not, our senses aren't up and we are much less likely to consider anything? Why is it fear and anger allow us to be more easily manipulated, or is that just false?
I think there's some truth to that, but I think I could talk a happy person into doing stuff a lot easier than I could someone who is scared. And I think it really depends on the context. So let's say I'm a therapist. I'm still using manipulation to help people. So if I have a client who's scared to go into hypnosis or scared to do cognitive behavioral therapy, fear does not make that helpful. Fear is not helpful in that situation. So fear does do one thing very well. It increases human predictability. It manufactures predictability. So if I was a bad guy, and let's say I'm part of a bad organization, I might have a 5-phase plan to destroy the country, and it would all start around fear. So it would start with disruption. So this is, let's say I have a 50-year plan to destroy the country. Disruption, so let's call this the 1960s. CIA, LSD, the hippie movement that just disrupted the way that we view society. So what did we say earlier? Show something that disrupts or changes viewpoints or creates a little bit of doubt or uncertainty about how society is made, how society is made up. Next will be infiltration. So infiltration will be parts of what I want are put into the education system or put into how people learn. And then there's pacification. And this is a fear cycle. So there's war, threat, disruption, diversion, and disease. War, threat, disruption, diversion, disease. It would go in that little cycle there. Then there's dependency. This would be the final stage. And this is where the public relies on the government and for information and for feelings. So our feelings come from being proven right with our political stuff. And the scary part about some of this is, and this is a little bit of a tangent here, I apologize, but a lot of us envision, or so many people envision, this dark cave with a long marble table and people smoking cigars in the dark, planning this crap out. That's not the way this happened. This happened because there's a war. There is a war on right now for your focus. Whether or not you're scrolling through Facebook and somebody texts you or some little notification comes up. You know how they little slide down from the top of your phone nowadays? A little notification comes up. Whether or not you click that is going to be based on how much dopamine you're expecting to receive within the next 60 seconds. So the war is for your focus. And this isn't like someone saying, oh, I need to control the world. No. This is, if you are not paying for the app, and let me start this over. If you are not paying for an app, you are a product. You are the product. So they're not selling to advertisers, they're selling you to advertisers. And I'm not saying this is inherently bad. I advertise on Facebook. But what we're doing here, this is not some laid out plan. The war for your focus is getting so good with analytics and data and AI that the mind control potential of everything is getting developed as a, not deliberately, but as a byproduct of what these social media companies are doing. And they're not doing it nefariously. They're doing it because I don't want you to leave my app and go over to TikTok. I want you to stay inside of my app. If you post a link to TikTok, I'm not going to promote that. You need to stay here, buy from my advertisers, click on my advertisers' links. So it's not some massive plan. It's the war for your focus. It's the war for your mind and whether or not you're going to stay inside the app. So that's where the marketing, television, and all that, if you've ever watched an infomercial to the end and been like, oh my God, why did I just do that? It's a sham wow commercial, but I made it to the end. That means that that infomercial company did the same before social media existed. They were competing very, very scientifically for your focus, for your attention. And now we've figured out the best way to get focus, if we go back to that stick breaking, is a potential threat. Not an imminent threat, but a potential threat. And this goes back to Alfred Hitchcock. We don't know what's going to happen. So Alfred Hitchcock said, imagine two guys sitting at a table, the bomb goes off, sitting under the table. You get 5 seconds of emotional reaction from a reader or from a viewer. Now imagine the guy sitting at the table talking about baseball, and you get to see the bomb, and there's a 5-minute timer, and they don't know it's there. So now we have suspense and tension. So the same thing that keeps us glued to the news, the media, social media, is our brain chemicals, but it's the same thing that keeps us glued to a really good book. It's the exact same thing. It's a looming potential for some kind of harm. It's the same, I mean, even in these local idiot cable stations that say 12 neighborhoods have poisoned water supplies, more after the break. Now you need to go to our advertisers before we tell you what you're going to be scared about. So it's the same thing.
Why do you think people risk so much for, ego or self-esteem? Actually, probably the best example is me. My previous job, when I would have people on the phone and they would be rude or insulting, I would almost feel the need to let them know that they didn't get the best of me, when in reality, why can't I just let that go? I'm never going to speak to them again. I got a job on the line here. Why is it that when our social status or self-esteem, ego is threatened, we're willing to have like no rational cost benefit analysis? It's just like, I don't care what the results are. I got to let this person know they haven't gotten the best of me.
So if we go back 200,000 years, the reason this really happens is because you might no longer be a deer skin specialist. You might have to move over to yarn making or whatever the hell else people did. But in the end, you get socially insulted, and your identity is tied very closely. Some people have high self-control, some people lower, but some people have a little bit bigger ego, which can go away. We can grow out of our ego, just like we're shedding skin cells all the time. But if we got insulted and other people laughed about it, or other people found out that our status isn't what we portray it to be, we lose sexual partners. So our identity and being insulted by someone else in some people's minds is very unconscious. This is not something we're really thinking about. This is deep down in our animal part of our brain, is linked with survival, the survival of your DNA.
What is the most important contribution or the most important thing you've learned from Scott Rouse?
Scott, I'll tell you the coolest thing. I mean, there's a whole lot. I could go on for a long time with Scott. Scott told me that he grew up with someone who was blind, and the blind person would still move their eyes like a seeing person would to access memories and access different thoughts inside their head. And we've seen some things on TV, like on CSI or something. He's looking right, he's accessing the creative side. He's looking left, he's accessing the logical side. That's not true. That's not true at all. But we do look certain ways to access memories, and everybody's a little bit different. So if we're going to be on video here, so let me just demonstrate this on you to your audience. And this is from, let's think of this. What's What is the seventh word of Jingle Bells? Boom. So there you go, up and to your left. So now if I ask you to recall a piece of data later and you go down and to your right, that's way different than the normal place you go to get remembered information. So hopefully that makes sense. But everybody's going to be different.
That's funny because I was even trying to fight it, but before I could remember to fight it, I'd already done it. Most important thing you learned from or contribution of Mark Bowden.
This was just a couple of months ago. Him and I, or several months ago, probably a year ago actually, because it was pre-COVID. So Mark and I were sitting together in a restaurant, and he was explaining we were both talking about how most of our behaviors are a result of fitting in socially and avoiding being attacked by saber-toothed tigers. It kind of boils down to those two things. If we look at fear, what fear does to our bodies, it prevents the tiger from biting us around the neck. That's literally what our body's trained to do. And Mark made a comment that I have since gone back to a bunch of interrogation videos and verified, that people, when they're nervous, are more likely to protect their joints. So covering up their elbows or, protecting these little joints, because that's where tigers would grab humans. And he said this is also, which I can confirm, a very sensitive spot to grab a person. So if you wouldn't grab a person by the neck to say hello, then you should not be touching them where the joints are. So in between joints is the best way, because touching the joint, the person's not consciously thinking, just like we're not consciously making a fear expression with our face and with our body reacts. We're unconsciously processing a potential for threat when someone touches our joints.
Most important thing you learned from or contribution of Greg Hartley.
So I think, Greg, I was a non-believer at the beginning of this eye movement stuff. And Greg proved it to me in less than 2 minutes.
How?
He had me think of the fifth word of something. It was the Pledge of Allegiance or Star Spangled Banner or something like that.
Interesting. Have you ever seen a movie that has to do with maybe the behavior profiling, and you've just you've sort of noticed that whoever wrote this script is in the know about how things work? Has that ever happened?
I think aside from the atrociously overacted and over ridiculously plotted characters, the Criminal Minds TV show, the actors are so over the top, ridiculous in these little niches that they have. But the behavior profiling data in that show is good, very spot on.
Dr. Phil has, oh my gosh, I can't remember his name. He has an FBI, former FBI agent on the show who does polygraphs.
Yes.
You are on record saying polygraphs are not a legitimate way of determining whether or not someone's telling the truth. Do you think that's just something that applies when someone who doesn't know how to use it is using it? Or is this guy legitimate? What's the truth about the polygraph issue?
I think there's a scale. I think there are some master polygraph examiners who can get to the truth, but the real secret purpose of a polygraph is not to determine truth or lie. And I'll tell you, it's to get a confession. It's to get the truth out. So many interrogators would say this, and I've learned this from my mentor, that you could use something like a battery operated LED light that's red and green with a switch that you're hiding under the table, and tell the person whether it's what they just said is true or false based on what you think. And once they start seeing the information come out, or the presence of the machine is a great prop. It's not extremely reliable. And even the guy who invented the polygraph, less than 2 years later, said he absolutely regretted it because the government was using it to do this stuff.
The social psychologist Jonathan Haidt has said that there is a huge myth a lot of people believe in that there are people who are pure evil. Even people that do terrible things are constantly doing it with good intentions, and they think that they are the victim of something fighting against a greater evil. Do you agree with that?
I don't think Jeffrey Dahmer or Ted Bundy believed that they were fighting against any evil. I don't think that either one of them believed they were fighting against anything. And evil implies an emotional desire to do bad. But if you don't know good from bad and you're an actual psychopath, then there's no such thing as evil. So then we get into a semantics debate of what the word evil really means. But I think there are evil people in the world who want, if we define evil as a inherent desire to see suffering in other people, 100% there's evil people there. But in the end, we go back to a statement. God, I can't remember who it was, but it's a profound statement that every human being must be the hero of their own story. It was Kafka. That's who said it.
What are some hypnosis techniques or mind control techniques you would use to help someone quit chewing tobacco?
I've never done it, but I think it would be a pretty simple thing. We'd go in and design a control room. So we don't realize that our brain's running on a lot of software type of programs because our brain runs on enough electricity to literally power a vacuum cleaner. Like it occupies 80% of the electrical activity of our body is in our brain. So we don't realize that a lot of that's going on. And it's extremely helpful to understand that you can build kind of a mental control center to go in there to the settings, to the admin control panel, to the Control-Alt-Delete system task manager, those kinds of things. And play around with stuff and get rid of stuff that you don't need. Most of us are carrying around crap from childhood and beliefs from our childhood that we did not consent, we did not willingly bring with us into adulthood. And we tend to think, oh, getting rid of these beliefs is really hard. No, just go find it and decide whether or not you want to believe in it anymore. You can change your political beliefs pretty much overnight, depending on what you're exposed to. Then you could change your belief about some stupid thing your teacher told you when you were in 4th grade. So we tend to think if I've been suffering with something my whole life, the solution has to be complicated or I'm an idiot. That's more cognitive bias for ourselves. If the solution is extremely simple, it can't be for me. It cannot be for me. And a lot of people tend to think they need something complicated because their problem is complicated. Problems are always complicated. Solutions are usually pretty simple.
You were on the Dr. Phil show, and after Mr. Hartley said, I don't believe the gentleman giving us this story because there's an indicator of deception with what he's doing with the guy's face. And the guy responds and says, well, that's actually because I have autism. And Scott Rouse says, I don't even believe that as he's saying it right now. And I go, that is pretty ballsy to say when, someone's claiming that they are a victim of something. However, Dr. Phil's staff walks out and says, we actually asked you about this and you had said no beforehand. So when it comes to something like that, how confident are you in the behavioral research that you can almost tell on the spot if someone is lying about something that if you're wrong about, it's extremely rude?
On the spot is different than what was on Dr. Phil. We studied that guy for hours.
Oh, yeah.
So we watched, his producer sent us the film of him talking back and forth. That was like an hour and a half long. And we did like a 10-page analysis each on what we saw. So I knew his baseline. So immediately when I see something that deviates from his truthful, natural behaviors, I knew instantly that he was lying. And I disagree with what you said. I do not think that Greg addressed that guy using the word gentleman.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so let me give you a situation. I thought you did great with explaining how Chris Wallace could have got things under control with the Biden-Trump debacle. I'm curious, in this situation, what would you do? So, for my mom's birthday, we are at the Ray Romano show. We spent a lot of money. We're like sitting up close, and we've been waiting for this for a while. He's on and he's doing his thing, and this drunk idiot behind us is talking and like clapping, and it's like, security is nowhere to be found. And it was just so annoying, but what am I gonna do? Yell? We're in the middle of a show. How would you stop a drunk moron who's talking and trying to hear his own clap during a comedy show like that?
So the first thing you need to see is the kid that's back there. It's not an adult. That's a little kid who felt like no one was paying attention to him, or he felt insignificant when he was growing up. So he's going to make it happen as an adult. And that number one stops us from judging the other person. We see some a-hole in a giant truck cut you off and then flip you off on the freeway. We tend to get angry instead of seeing like, that's a powerless little 8-year-old kid inside of there who got bullied or beat up and very unconsciously, without him knowing, made a permanent decision. I'm never going to let anyone make me feel inferior again. And if I can just act like I can act really, really tough, then no one's going to hurt me. No one's going to come and touch me. Think about the Chihuahuas, who are the most scared, are the ones that bark the most. The smallest dogs typically bark the most. So if you turned around and talked to this guy, you're not addressing a big tough guy. You're addressing an insecure guy with a limited, very limited self-control. So your first instinct might be wrong. So I would probably turn around and clap with him and ask him, how much does he love Ray Romano? How long has he been a fan? Because he wants to talk about himself. He needs to feel significant, and I'm making that happen first. And I get to know his name, what his name is. And I say, hey, you absolutely don't have to do this, okay? So now I'm telling him, you're in total control. Because if I ask him to do something, there's something called reactance. And on a small scale, I just want you to imagine let's go to a bar in your town, and let's say they have 2 men's bathrooms, one up front, one in the back. And the one up front, on the mirror, it says, please do not write on these walls. Thank you so much. That's all. And then you go in the back bathroom, and there's a sign on the mirror that says, don't you ever write on these frickin' walls ever. And if we catch you, you're really in for it. Management. What's going to happen to the walls in that bathroom?
Yeah.
Anybody with a Sharpie in their pocket is going to go crazy. But they're going to go crazy because of reactance. I feel like my sense of choice and freedom is being threatened, and I'm going to pop out the other way. Just like people on Facebook that take pictures that says, do not touch this sign, do not stand on the grass, and they'll take a picture doing it. That's reactance. So we're avoiding reactance with this guy by saying, hey, listen, I'm putting my hands up like this, saying he's in charge, because he needs to feel like he's in charge. Like, he might be violent, but I'm 10,000 times better at violence than he might be. So I put my hands up. I say, hey, you really don't have to do this. My mom's hearing is very sensitive. She just had ear canal surgery in her ear, or something like that. Is there any way you could just lower the volume a little bit? I'm just as excited as you are. But you definitely don't have to stop. I just wanted to ask if it was okay with you.
Nice. Very nice. Final question. I'm sorry. Was there anything else? Because I'm dying for wisdom in those sorts of scenarios.
So we know, we look back there, he's not craving strength and power. He's craving significance. Mm-hmm. I'm significant to other people. They can hear me. They can see me. So you're giving him significance. If he's craving power, then you would need to give him that. So there's different things that people are looking for. You need to identify that.
Now, one final question. You said some time ago that there can be one person, with a split personality, in which one personality literally has diabetes and another personality literally does not have diabetes. Is this true? And do you have a general source to look into for that?
No, I think this was from listening to Dr. Colin Ross, who's a psychotherapist in Texas who deals with a lot of this kind of stuff. You may have heard of him. He actually wrote a book called Project Bluebird. So he delved into this research a lot more than I ever have. But I think that it's important. I mean, there's even multiple personalities where one of them has rosacea and the other one doesn't, or one has acne. And I mean, this stuff is well documented by people way smarter than I am. So I would default to that. So I don't know the names offhand. I usually know a lot of these names. I don't know those names for that research.
Mr. Hughes, thank you so much for your time. The website is chasehughes.com. The book is 6 Minute X-Ray. Sir, thank you so much for coming on Keith Knight. Don't tread on anyone.